Before we get started, this video requires an important preamble, which will take me a couple of minutes. You can skip this by jumping to the next step on the video timeline, but I recommend you hear me out first. The Full Metal Jacket film study you're about to watch was originally posted in early 2021, and I believe it's one of the very best and most important videos I've ever produced. After receiving over 30,000 views within its first 48 hours, which is far above my channel's average for a new upload, this video was suddenly shadow banned on its third day by Google, which owns YouTube. The video was no longer searchable on YouTube or in Google search engine for the following weeks, even if the exact title of the video was used as the search term. However, the video was searchable to me personally whenever I signed into YouTube, and this was a cheap attempt to hide the ban from the uploader. For the general public, the video could only be found at the time by manually going to my YouTube channel and looking at the list of recent uploads. In contrast, the video could be discovered in other search engines such as Yahoo and Bing, the difference being that these were not Google owned. The suppression of this video by Google and YouTube reduced it to a permanent view count cap of approximately 100 views a day. This sudden flatlining of views had never happened to any of my hundreds of videos before on any of my channels. To test whether this was just some sort of a technical glitch, which can happen, I posted a pinned comment containing a link to the Full Metal Jacket brainwashing video under two of my other most popular videos at the time. Those videos were Full Metal Jacket Born Again Hard and Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the anti-movie. Both of those videos have been regularly receiving approximately 3,000 views a day for months. But within 24 hours of me linking the shadow banned Full Metal Jacket brainwashing video in their comment sections, those two videos also suddenly flatlined at approximately 100 views a day and have been stuck on that reduced level since, the exact same treatment as was given to the original Full Metal Jacket video. As you will see from watching this re-upload, which is unaltered, my Full Metal Jacket film study did not break any of YouTube's rules, and it did not make any claims about the topics of lockdowns, vaccines, or election results, which were the key controversial issues that were driving most YouTube censorship back in 2021. The key word, brainwashing, was also not an issue in itself because plenty of popular YouTube videos use that term in their title and content, but they are allowed to reach their audience, and this was also true at the time in 2021. There was no justification whatsoever to censor this well-balanced, educational, anti-brainwashing video. So now that this film analysis is re-uploaded 3 years after the original shadow ban, will it get suppressed again? I suggest you copy the video link and save it. Try searching for the video again on YouTube in the coming days or weeks, or on Google search engine. If it doesn't appear at all, even if you use the exact title of the video, then you'll know that this platform is still arbitrarily suppressing videos according to the personal biases of its moderators and the personal biases of those who write the algorithms. I also recommend that you share this video link via whatever social media you tend to use to others who would like to know about the universal art of brainwashing, which affects us all across many aspects of our society and by many different groups of perpetrators, and which Stanley Kubrick had worked so hard to educate us about. So with all that out the way, let's crack on with the video. Hi folks, let's take a look at brainwashing as presented in the classic war movie Full Metal Jacket. Before we get into details, I first need to frame some context here. This video isn't going to be a generalized attack on military institutions. We need military institutions because if we didn't have them, then other regimes that do have a military could take over the world. Just like if we didn't have police, then organised criminals would take over. And part of having a military is that we need to have soldiers who are trained in the art of violence against violence. I wish that wasn't the case for humanity, but that's not what this video is about. What I've referred to in the title of the video as brainwashing can be more politely referred to as conditioning or simply training. Some forms of conditioning and training are extremely useful, such as learning to read and write. And military training can also bring out great qualities in men. At the same time, soldiers can be brutalized by their training, which can be made worse in turn by their wartime experience. They can end up committing horrendous war crimes, or they can become crazy spree killers, as is alluded to in Full Metal Jacket.
That's affirmative. Charles Whitman killed 12 people from a 28-story observation tower at the University of Texas. Those individuals showed what one motivated Marine and his rifle can do.
Soldiers, like politicians and academics, can also be so brainwashed that they end up being useful idiots for warmongering regimes. Every war has its complexities, and so it's not always easy to tell which side, if any, has the least brainwashed army. So for any military personnel watching this video, rest assured I'm not denouncing all military training or denying that it has positive functions. Okay, so on with the film review. Until recently, I'd always considered the first half of Full Metal Jacket to be a basic statement against the brainwashing aspects of military training. It's hardly even subtle in this respect. Private Leonard Lawrence, nicknamed Private Pile, is relentlessly targeted and bullied by Sergeant Hartman, who also manipulates the rest of the platoon into torturing Leonard. He is emotionally broken by the experience, and then he kills Hartman, then himself. That's the basic surface narrative in the first half, and the sheer horror of what's done to Leonard is initially masked over by Hartman's hilarious insults to the recruits.
Private Pile, I'm gonna give you 3 seconds. Exactly 3 fucking seconds to wipe that stupid-looking grin off your face, or I will gouge out your eyeballs and skull fuck you!
Note the skull fucking implication regarding the mind fuck that the recruits will be subjected to during their relentless training. Interesting dialogue there. Incidentally, for those of you who've heard the commonly repeated rumour that most of the dialogue in the first half of the film was ad-libbed, and that would be mostly by R. Lee Ermey, who plays Sergeant Hartman, it wasn't. I read an early version of the script from 1985, I think it was, and a lot of the dialogue was already there. What does appear to have happened from the set reports that I've come across is that Ermey was doing a lot of rehearsals, and at that stage there was some ad-libbing, from which Kubrick selected out parts that he liked and incorporated them into the script. By the time of the actual shoot, nearly all of the dialogue was on paper, but a bit of ad-libbing still occurred, with Kubrick selecting and deleting as he saw fit. So no, the idea that most of this dialogue from Ermey was just made up during actual shooting takes, that's misinformation to my knowledge. So anyway, I recently went back to Full Metal Jacket with a view to updating my original study, which I'd written way back in 2008 when I'd not long started out in film analysis, and something dawned on me recently that I'd not considered before. The military training context of Full Metal Jacket's brainwashing scenes might not be the main point. Kubrick may have also been making a larger statement about how brainwashing occurs generally in multiple social contexts, and a glance over Kubrick's filmography appears to support this. In Paths of Glory, Kubrick gave us a story of French soldiers being coerced into battle under the threat of execution if they refused to fight. That story was a military context, of course, but like with Full Metal Jacket, its lessons about military coercion are more likely statements about military coercion of violence across the globe and across history, rather than only relating to a single historical war that is long gone and is now unchangeable. Kubrick also directed Spartacus. It wasn't his script and he had very limited control of production, but still the movie involved men being brainwashed or trained for violence, and then as gladiators being forced into fighting each other. Thematically, this fits in Kubrick's larger filmography. And Dr. Strangelove had scenes in which branches of the US military fight each other based upon paranoia and lies fed to them by their higher command. Again, military context. But 2 films later, Kubrick made A Clockwork Orange, in which non-military brainwashing is a central plot element. This time, the surface story is of a man whose criminal impulse is neutered by brainwashing, and in turn his ability to defend himself in an already violent world is neutered as well. Kubrick's next film was Barry Lyndon, in which a young man is forced into military service in multiple contexts across Europe. He is brutalized by the training and war experiences, but instead of being a fully brainwashed soldier dedicated to a national or ideological cause other than self-interest, he is turned into a social psychopath who manipulates his way through the ranks of wealth and power. Eyes Wide Shut's orgy scenes present brainwashed secret society members who rigidly do as they're told, like foot soldiers. And finally, there's AI, artificial intelligence, which has brainwashing elements weaved in beneath its story of robots programmed to serve their human masters. Spielberg directed this film, but Kubrick spent decades conceiving the basic story, and he supplied Spielberg with extensive visual storyboards which Spielberg adhered to. In other words, Kubrick laid the directional foundations for the movie AI. In the boardroom scenes of that film, businessmen and scientists in their combat gear, also known as business suits, listen to delusional lectures about creating perfect human-robot companions, in other words, slaves. And his applauding audience of brainwashed academics are shown with inanimate robots placed around them, as if this academic audience are the brainwashed robots that they seek to create. The reference to academia as a form of brainwashing, and hence to academics as pre-programmed or conditioned automatons, is made more overtly in these scenes of the final act.
Is this the place they make you real? This is the place they make you read. I'm David! I'm David!
Now, of course, I'm not saying that academia is useless or that all academics are pre-programmed, conditioned automatons. That would be ridiculous. Some of my favourite writers are academics, and I've learned a great deal from reading academic books. But it is a theme that is in the AI film. Kubrick was very conscious of the fact that there's a thin line between training, conditioning, and brainwashing. He even avoided academic training himself, preferring to self-educate through extensive reading and experimentation, and he certainly did well because he came up with a number of inventions, technical inventions, for the creation of his films, even though he wasn't an academic. And his movies like A Clockwork Orange and AI certainly present non-military brainwashing themes. And so, going back to Full Metal Jacket, I now view the training section of the movie as both a statement against how men are conditioned or brainwashed into war, and as a statement about how people are brainwashed in the more general sense, be it through lunatic cults, academic ranks, secret societies, political parties, or plain old news media brainwashing. But military training is a very strong metaphoric context, because the brainwashing methods are universally used in many countries by many militaries on account of their reliability. Those methods are incredibly precise and purposeful in design, and military training is such an intense and exaggerated form of brainwashing that it has powerful dramatic impact on the screen. Whereas more underhanded and prolonged forms of brainwashing in other social contexts are harder to draw attention to in the context of a 2-hour movie. There are, of course, some key differences between military brainwashing and non-military brainwashing, especially contexts where the conditioning is unofficial. So, for example, with both the military and academia, there is an openly stated intention to condition the subject within a specified time frame. The military version is short and intense. The academic version takes years and is more psychological. And if we consider that the education of children in schools includes brainwashing elements as well, such as the regimentation of a 5-day working week into the subject's psyche, that form of brainwashing spans a good 10 years or more. However, unlike schools, universities and the military, some powerful forms of brainwashing are done without the subject being made aware that they are being enrolled in a training program. Commercial advertising, for example. We don't usually sign up for these. We don't ask to be manipulated into buying a product by associating false value with it. Instead, advertisers try to get to us covertly through product placement and other methods, and they stretch out their advertising techniques over time so that you catch glimpses of adverts here and there over many years, and it slowly puts the product into your mind and eventually persuades you to buy it. So what I'm going to do for the rest of this video is highlight some of the key brainwashing elements in Full Metal Jacket's training scenes. Some are universally present in many other contexts outside of the military, others are military specific. So as we go through, have a think about which of these brainwashing methods do and don't manifest in non-military contexts and how they manifest. If you occasionally feel like you have been subjected to some of these methods yourself, then that's okay, you probably have. I know I certainly have. Right, so let's get into it. I'm going to use a bit of a scattershot approach to try and get as many points across as possible without dragging this video out to 2 hours. There are lots of overlaps between these techniques as well, and that's enough for you to explore later on your own. First up, we have legal pressure. By this, I'm mainly referring to men being drafted into military service against their will, but I'm also referring to the presence of military courts and prisons. Refuse to serve under a draft or go against the training program too much, and you can wind up in a prison cell for a year or two, which is effectively a form of mild but prolonged torture. Next up, separating the subject from familiar life context. Military training involves young men being taken out of their familiar environments, their home, neighbourhood, family, friends, and dropping them alone into a new environment that is radically different to what they're used to. Not only is the physical environment new, but they effectively are locked in among a large batch of unfamiliar faces. Imagine how much more difficult it would be to brainwash a large group of people who are already very familiar with each other and have close bonds. Such a group would be a lot more resistant to the conditioning, they would stand up for each other, they would share opinions of disagreements with the program, and so on. In fact, I've seen that kind of familial group resistance in work-based civilian training courses. So the military tactic of separating recruits from familiar environments and familiar individuals is a massive psychological pattern break. It severs many of the thousands of intricate links between people and their own historical context, making the brainwashing process easier from there on. In fact, it's a familiar tactic used in brainwashing cults as well, such as the one that was run by Charles Manson. The cult leaders typically find a remote location to house their members and cut them off from access to family and friends who might otherwise sabotage the brainwashing. Full Metal Jacket makes a very strong point of this tactic in that hardly any of the recruits talk about their personal histories. Hartman asks them some initial questions about their backgrounds, but only so that he can insult their backgrounds to try and make them feel ashamed of where they are from.
Where in hell are you from anyway, Private? Sir, Texas, sir! Holy dog shit! Texas, only steers and queers come from Texas, Private Cowboy!
The same disconnection from personal history even occurs between the two halves of the movie. Joker meets up with Cowboy in the second half, and there is only minimal dialogue about their shared boot camp experiences.
This is my bro Joker from the island, and this is
Rafter Man.
Rafter Man.
It's almost like they can't even remember their personal histories or the way in which they were brainwashed in the first place. Next up, frame the brainwashing as self-improvement. In generalized military dialogue, there's a very clever piece of verbal manipulation regarding the perception of training. Even though recruits are already technically adults, they are told that military training will turn them into men. An implication therein is that the personal history of the recruits before the boot camp was just child's play and is therefore something to be disregarded. But that's nonsense if you think about it. Boot camp training is an incredibly artificial setup. What the recruits have experienced beforehand in civilian life is more akin to reality. In fact, it could be argued that military training causes some men to regress into boyish states of mind, where bullying, peer pressure, and fantasies of violence acted out through toys, such as toy soldiers, become dominant in the psyche once again. So they get told they're being turned into men, but in some ways they're actually regressing to boyish states. And this general framing of military training as self-improvement also shows in that some people who have been in the military look upon other people who haven't been in the military as not quite being men. It often shows in conversations with them. In his very first speech, Hartman slips in two pieces of clever manipulation.
I am hard, but I am fair. There is no racial bigotry here. I do not look down on niggers, kikes, wops, or greasers. Because I am hard, you will not like me. But the more you hate me, the more you will learn.
Actually, both of those claims are garbage. Hartman isn't fair. He claims to be non-racist, and then he gives a racial insult to Private Brown.
Well, there's one thing that you won't like, Private Snowball. They don't serve fried chicken and watermelon on a daily basis in my mess hall.
I'm not saying he's a full-on racist, but, he did contradict himself there. He brutally targets Leonard and drives him to suicide. And the idea that the more the recruits hate him, the more they'll learn. Well, if I hate Stalin or Hitler, does that mean that they stood for something good and worthwhile? No. An effective teacher is more likely to be respected than hated. If they're hated by the majority of their trainees, then they're likely doing something wrong. But these twists of logic are thrown at the recruits so quickly that they barely have a moment to question it. When Hartman dishes out harsh and unnecessary punishments, he typically frames it as if the recruit is inflicting punishment on themselves.
Private Pile, if there is one thing in this world that I hate, it is an unlocked footlocker. You know that, don't you?
Sir, yes, sir!
Sir, the private said no, sir, sir!
Well, you little maggot, you make me want to vomit.
Hartman's attacks on the personal background of the recruits is also an attack on their identity, and it's a clever piece of reverse psychology. Indoctrination often involves the subject being told that their own personal history was a form of brainwashing, and that the new leader is going to deprogram the subject, free them from their personal history, and give them psychological freedom. And ironically, there's often a string of truth to this, but the new leader takes the subject too far in the other direction. They may give them some new strengths and freedoms and insights along the way, but also they brainwash them in ways that defeat the point as far as the recruit is concerned. The string of truth thing is important. If you can have some important benefits or truths that are weaved into the initial stages of the brainwashing process, then it gets the person on board because they actually think, I'm getting something out of this. But if you offer them nothing positive at all, then they can be highly resistant. Of course, that's not a problem for Hartman because legally he has got these recruits on the base. They are locked in like they're in a prison and they can't get out of the situation whether they like him or not. The head shaving thing, by the way, is also a bit of an insult because a lot of people have never been head shaved and it doesn't suit them when it does happen. Humiliation is an important factor in a lot of brainwashing, and oh boy do we get an onslaught of this in Full Metal Jacket. Hartman's constant insults to the recruits are so extreme that they're hilarious.
You climb obstacles like old people fuck. You know that, Private Pile? Then quit, you slimy fucking walrus-looking piece of shit! Get the fuck off of my obstacle!
There's personal one-to-one humiliation, and there's the much more powerful public humiliation that Hartman specialises in. We could even think of military training as equivalent to an exorcism. The unique individual needs to be ridiculed, discredited, made to seem undesirable, and then purged through a repetitive succession of rituals. This technique of framing the individual and their history as corrupt, delusional, and unworthy is not only powerful, but in many brainwashing contexts it is essential. In many cults and membership organisations, a view is aggressively promoted that everyone outside of the institution are the brainwashed ones, the blind ones, the indoctrinated ones, the weak ones, and that only the brainwashing institution or cult leader can provide awakening, strength, truth, and virtue. Religious cults are a frequent context for this kind of only we can awaken you, only we can put you in touch with the truth tactic. It's often framed as being in touch with God. Full Metal Jacket includes allusions to this.
Happy birthday, dear Jesus. Now you do love the Virgin Mary, don't you?
Sir, negative, sir!
You will be a minister of death praying for war. God has a hard-on for Marine because we kill everything we see.
Interesting line, that last one. Does this mean that the recruits see nothing, kill everything we see? As well as the claim that military training will turn the recruits into real men, Hartman hilariously makes suggestions that they have come to boot camp as gay men who need to be straightened out.
Sir, Texas, sir! Holy dog shit, Texas, only steers and queers come from Texas, Private Cowboy. Do you suck dicks?
Sir, no, sir!
Bullshit, I'll bet you could suck a golf ball through a garden hose.
Sir, no, sir!
And there's an underhanded aspect that military service is likened to losing one's virginity. Again, becoming a man.
This is my rifle, this is my gun, this is for fighting, this is for fun.
Joker knows about this and he mocks it.
I wanted to meet interesting and stimulating people of an ancient culture and kill them. I wanted to be the first kid on my block to get a confirmed kill.
Or first kid on his block to lose his virginity. In my view, real men and real women form their own personal opinions based on what they actually experienced. They don't wait for some group or institution to spoon-feed them an oven-ready narrative complete with dumb slogans and contradictory codes of conduct. Have a think about the membership groups that you were involved in, especially the ones you cherish most, And whether you've been sold this bullshit line of thinking that non-members are blind fools or weaklings, and that only the membership institution has access to the ultimate truth. If you swallowed that line and internalized it, then you're probably to some extent brainwashed. Before we carry on with this study, folks, there is one cult that I do recommend you join. And this is the cult of individual, self-determined freethinkers. It's a philosophy that I weave into much of my work at collativelearning.com and here on my YouTube channels and other social media, which are all linked below. You're fine as you are, of course, so you don't really need to join my cult, and I'm certainly not the only person supporting or promoting this free-thinking attitude. There's probably others who are much better at it than I am, so if you find them, then that's great. Meanwhile, if you like this video you've been watching and you want access to a great deal more of my content, then go ahead and join my cult. You're not required to abandon your friends and family. I won't tell you that I have all the answers. I'm not offering a single universal truth that will save you. I don't even require you to wear a uniform, and you can leave any time you like without being harassed. To join up, you can either become a monthly supporter of my work on Patreon, which will give you access to many hours of additional content, or you can simply visit my website from time to time, where you'll find free in-depth articles on Kubrick films and other topics, and you can order digital downloads from my library of offline videos and articles. Follow the links in the video description below, bookmark my site so you won't forget about it, and check in from time to time to see what's on offer. Alright, so back to Full Metal Jacket. Next principle of universal brainwashing: replacing individual physical appearance with group appearance. Hair colour, length and style is something that tends to be unique to individuals, and so shaving this away is a direct attack on their identity. It's also funny that shaving the head is something we do to people who are about to have brain surgery. The discarding and replacement of the recruits' clothing and supplying them with identical bunks and other belongings, this serves the same effect. But it's not just about discarding the existing personal image-based identity. You have to supply a replacement identity, and so the skinheads and identical uniforms are also about making the recruits look almost identical to each other. This is a way of forcing them to adopt a group identity and hence group behaviour instead of individualist behaviour. This is very common in life. There are basic school uniforms for children in some countries, like we have here in the UK. We have police and firemen in uniforms. There's business suits, tuxedo uniforms for special occasions. Religious institutions have their own dress code uniforms. And there's even social trend uniforms such as goth, punk, biker, hippie, rapper, and so on. In fact, the word uniform is directly related to making people look identical. I'm not saying it's always bad, I'm just saying it's there, and sometimes it's part of a brainwashing alteration of personal identity. So while we can argue that police uniforms, for example, are important so that the public can distinguish who is and isn't a trained and certified police officer, the restriction of individuality is also present in that we hardly ever see cops whose physical image includes personal expressions of individuality. Tattoos, wild hairstyles, prominent facial piercings, or expressive adornments attached to the uniform, these are generally conspicuously missing from the uniforms of boardroom corporate bosses, from police, from firemen, and the likes. And this is the case with many forms of physical image conditioning. It's not just the uniform, but the absence of expressed individuality. This is key so that, for example, a cop is viewed publicly as only a cop and nothing more. Next up, manufacturing consensus of opinion. This is the tactic of manipulating everyone into expressing pre-designed uniform opinions. There's a lot involved with this, but of course a fundamental element is the denial of individual free speech.
From now on, you will speak only when spoken to.
In particular, recruits asking questions that challenge the opinions of the brainwashing institution have to be clamped down on. Any expression of disagreement or even refusal to express conformed opinions are responded to with immediate aggressive shouting down or even with violence.
Who the fuck said that? Who's the slimy little communist shit twinkle-toed cocksucker down here who just signed his own death warrant? You little scumbag!
Unique to Full Metal Jacket in comparison to other military training movies is that the recruits are very rarely shown engaging in personal chit-chat, and so hardly any personal opinions among the recruits are shown. Here, Joker engages in a private chat with Cowboy, and note that he looks around first to see whether anyone else is listening before he dares speak.
Leonard talks to his rifle.
Having the recruits collectively speak pre-written opinions in a single group unified voice is also a means of manufacturing consensus.
My rifle is my best friend. It is my life.
I must master it as I must master my life.
Pin my medals upon my chest.
Pin my medals upon my chest.
But this is also present non-verbally in the form of group-shared activities. Having everyone go through the same brainwashing routines not only reinforces their identification with the group instead of the self, but also it promotes the idea that the physical and emotional torture of the experience is acceptable. It can be amazing how much abuse people will take if they see other people around them enduring the same. Subject an individual to such harsh treatment and they might well complain or refuse to do as they're told, but in a group, each recruit's lack of willingness to speak out against the activity creates an illusionary consensus, the false notion that everybody accepts and agrees with the orders. The result of all this is that the recruits not only don't express any thoughts of their own, but they also don't get to hear any opinions outside of those supplied by the institution. This is immensely powerful because most people lack confidence in their own thoughts to the point that they need to hear similar opinions expressed from others in order to maintain their belief in it themselves. Going beyond boot camp forced consensus, some governments even have laws prohibiting soldiers from talking publicly about what they've experienced in the military. This can be argued as a measure for protecting sensitive operational information from making its way into the hands of the enemy. That's fine. But it also serves a function of preventing war atrocities and waste from being reported to the general public. And it prevents a lot of soldiers who have become disillusioned with their military service from communicating their ideas to the wider public. How often do we hear former soldiers publicly advising people not to join the military or advising them how to resist the brainwashing techniques of boot camp? Suppression of personal and alternate opinions and the repeating of predetermined slogans for creating false consensus. This is incredibly common. Many non-military institutions have strict rules on what their members can say publicly, with punishments at the ready if they do speak out of line. Public firings as a warning to other members, withdrawal of funds, and general character assassination at dissenting voices. These techniques are prominent in academia, even in the basic physical sciences. They're also common in journalism, politics, and many other contexts. It also occurs in terms of news media coverage of specific issues. The public are often denied access to dissenting opinions in terms of news coverage, and a lot of people hold a view that if something isn't being reported in the news, then it's either not true or not important. And that's them being brainwashed. But of course, the ultimate aim of manufactured consensus opinion is to persuade enough people to repeat the opinions of the brainwashing institutions so that the institution itself no longer needs to speak those opinions. It can rely on those who it has already brainwashed to do the speaking and thus keep up the false consensus illusion. And that brings up the next brainwashing tactic: inciting peer pressure against resistors. Possibly the most insidious form of brainwashing is the covert encouragement of violence against a resistant subject by third parties.
From now on, whenever Private Pyle fucks up, I will not punish him. I will punish all of you.
Hartman knows damned well that by punishing the rest of the recruits for supposed mistakes by Leonard, he is calling upon the group to violently gang up on Leonard. Note that when Leonard is howling in pain after the soap bar beating, which is known as a blanket party, and apparently really happens in Marine training, Hartman doesn't come out of his quarters to find out what the noise is.
Ow! Ow!
He does wake up later when Leonard starts shouting in the bathroom.
My rifle is my best friend. It is my life.
Get back in your bunks.
As I must
What is this Mickey Mouse shit?
But he knew that this blanket party was going to happen. He wanted it to happen. And if it had been reported to him by Leonard, he would have done nothing about it, even though it is essentially torture. I'll bet he sat there in bed hearing Leonard crying his eyes out and said to himself, "Good on you, boys. However, there doesn't have to be actual violence for the peer pressure to work. The mere threat of violence from the peer group is often enough. By engaging in this blanket party beating of Leonard, the group are reinforcing the brainwashing message among each other that Hartman's orders must be followed without fail, or they will be tortured next. So by engaging in this blanket party, they are effectively contributing to their own brainwashing. Beyond violence, simple peer rejection for not conforming to the brainwashing program is often enough. It amazes me how few people in society are willing to stand their own ground for something they believe in when they feel that the group opinion is against them and they don't have any buddies to back them up in their viewpoint. But often it's not really the case that everybody else disagrees. Sometimes it's just that others are afraid to express agreement for fear of being targeted. And social media is a funny context for this as well. I find that what people will say in person about what they believe is often very different to what they will admit on social media. It only takes a few hardcore brainwashed idiots to attack someone who expresses an opinion they don't want to hear, and in turn a lot of people avoid expressing that same opinion in case they're attacked. In some ways it's a pandemic of cowardice because the rantings of the brainwashed attackers are usually very easy to defeat. They're especially easy to defeat if you familiarise yourself with their rantings. Next up, repetition of false messages. In itself, repetition isn't very powerful. You can tell someone something they don't believe at all, and you can tell them it over and over, and you'll end up being ignored. But repetition is powerful when it's combined with other methods. A key example from boot camp is to physically and mentally exhaust the recruits, which distracts them consciously but also breaks down their cognitive ability to resist verbal input. They can't think straight, they lack the energy to put up a mental fight, so you can hit them hard with repetitious verbal messaging in the exhausted state, and there's a better chance that your messages will sink in and become subconsciously embedded. A variation on this apparently used by Charles Manson was to drug his followers and then verbally program their beliefs while they were spaced out and thus unable to resist. So whether it's exhaustion or drugs, the result is similar to hypnosis. Get someone into an alternative trance-like state, an exhausted state, a drugged state, and a lot of their usual conscious defences will become lowered. Another aspect used by Hartman is that if a recruit is bombarded very rapidly and constantly with lies, then they don't have time to mentally process what they're being told, and so the messages sink in. In hypnosis, this is called overload. Hartman is constantly screaming orders and indoctrinating statements towards his men to the point that they probably hear his voice and slogans echoing in their sleep.
Hell, I like you. You can come over to my house and fuck my sister.
I want to slip my tube stick into your sister.
Here, for example, the recruits are running in slow motion, and yet Hartman's non-stop shouting of orders is heard at normal speed.
Quickly, ladies! Add holes and elbows! Move it out! Get up here! Move it! Move it! Move it! Move it!
I've heard this rapid repetition technique done a lot in ideological indoctrination. Like Hartman, ideologists usually have memorized an extensive internal library of verbal arguments with which to influence others. When each of those arguments are heard in isolation and you have time to formulate questions and to notice contradictions, those individual arguments fall apart very quickly. But the expert ideologist gets around this by spewing out a non-stop bombardment of internally pre-written dialogue, and they deliberately keep changing topics slightly before any of their statements can be challenged. If you pin them down on specific badly thought out statements and demand discussion of the merits of that statement, then the brainwasher starts to squirm and they can get very angry because they don't want their belief system to be successfully challenged. It really works. Pin them down and don't let them change subject. Before we move on, one more variation on the use of repetition, and this is a powerful one, is Hartman's requirement that the recruits memorize military slogans, lyrics, and bureaucratic orders. If they don't memorize them, then he punishes them.
What's your 6th general order?
Sir, the private has been instructed, but he does not know, sir.
You slimy scumbag, get on your face and give me 25.
Sir, aye, sir.
What's your 5th general order?
Sir, the private's 5th general order is to quit my post only when properly relieved, sir.
Part of the reason this is effective is because the memorizing process requires that the recruits internally repeat the messages to themselves over and over again, thus programming themselves. In the religious context, the repetition of group prayers can be thought of in this way. Next up, demonize the enemy. Probably a bit of an obvious one, this. It's very common in brainwashing and is arguably a requirement. The brainwashing leader or institution has to persuade the recruit that there is a terrifying enemy that is threatening them, their loved ones, and their future. With Hartman, the enemy predictably is communism.
About how the free world will conquer communism with the aid of God and a few Marines.
Funny that he talks about the free world to the recruits, who are virtually prison inmates in this context, and many of whom will have been drafted into service against their will. Free world my arse. Now don't get me wrong, I'm no fan of communism, but the throwing about of oversimplistic ideological labels is standard in political indoctrination. Left-wing, right-wing, liberal, conservative, capitalist, communist, libertarian, socialist, these labels create division and justify an us versus them mentality, and the brainwashing that goes with the resulting conflict. But the labels very rarely reflect the complexities of reality. There's no such thing as a completely socialist or completely capitalist country. You need elements of both, and if there is a devil at work, it can usually be found in the details that are unique to how that country balances those two. Vietnam specifically had a long and complex history that led to communism taking root there, but I seriously doubt that most Marines were taught that history. However, I won't dwell on this aspect of brainwashing because I find those kinds of ideological labels incredibly boring, and because Hartman only makes minimal use of it in the movie. I expect, though, that in real military training, demonizing enemies with the use of oversimplistic ideological labels is probably more central to the brainwashing process than what we get in this film. Next one, and we're almost finished here, bribe the resistors. Hartman initially makes Private Brown squad leader, possibly because on the first day of training Brown shouts his answers the loudest, and so he seems to be the most committed to doing what he's told. But when Hartman discovers that Joker is the most intellectually resistant to his brainwashing, he fires Brown and makes Joker squad leader. And he even compliments Joker, a very rare thing from Hartman.
Private Joker is silly and he's ignorant, but he's got guts, and guts is enough.
An element of Hartman's decision could be that it's a form of bribery. It appeals to Joker's pride, but also Joker is excused from some of the training routines on account of him taking time out to train Leonard. I would rather train Leonard than be shouted at by Hartman all the time. At the same time, tasking Joker with training Leonard cleverly reframes Joker's situation. Joker is encouraged to help brainwash another recruit. He may do it more calmly and more effectively, but he's still helping to mould Leonard, and it gives Joker an opportunity to be proud of stepping into Hartman's shoes. In general life, this method of bribing the resistant is quite common. Higher wages, greater perceived social status, these gimmies are used across the board to get intelligent, capable people to assist in the brainwashing and control of others. It certainly works, though I'll add that the extremely resistant ones aren't usually bribed in this way because they're too good at rocking the boat if they get promoted. In most of the organisations that I've worked for over the years, before I became self-employed, I noticed that there was a very consistent pattern. The willingness to toe the line and not rock the boat was the key trait that upper management were looking for when filling mid-management positions. Not that I was after a mid-management position, it's not my style. I prefer to do my own thing. And so even if I wanted those positions, they wouldn't have took me. And the secondary trait that management want is capability. And so I met many mid-level managers who were very inefficient, but they were approved of by high management because they didn't rock the boat and they towed the line. Brainwashing institutions have to operate like this, otherwise strong-minded individuals will climb the ranks and restructure the institution into something they want it to be. And the final brainwashing principle of this video. The brainwasher must express conviction. Given that the logical, rational and moral arguments used to brainwash people tend to easily fall apart under calm scrutiny, Brainwashers tend to compensate with overemphasis on emotional conviction. Hartman absolutely relies on this, screaming his slogans right in the faces of the recruits, using violence when they resist his claims. And of course, that's what the close-up shouting is all about. It's a constant reminder: accept and agree with my statements no matter how ridiculous, or I will physically hurt you.
Sir, you got a war face? Ah! That's a war face! Now let me see your war face! Ah!
However, it's not always all-out shouting and screaming that communicates emotional conviction. In general everyday life, Hartman's behaviour would be rejected by the vast majority of people unless they had already been brainwashed into his belief system. So outside of the military, strong emotional conviction in the form of underhanded threats is a lot more effective and subtle. Prolonged uncomfortable eye contact combined with a slight frown and jaw tension, a voice that is slightly raised in volume but deep in tone, and perhaps the words drawn out. Rigid, stone-cold, non-reactive posture can be very intimidating to people. And these things can be done consciously or unconsciously by the brainwashing party. And then there's the more positive forms of conviction that don't convey overt hostility, but still give the impression of firm belief in what is being spoken. Over-enthusiastic delivery in the forms of exaggerated facial expressions, hand movements, and vocal emphasis of key words and phrases. These things in themselves don't make the rational argument stronger at all, but they give the impression that the speaker thoroughly believes what they are saying and they don't feel emotionally or intellectually conflicted. A lot of people get fooled by this, but if you go listen to delusional schizophrenics who strongly believe the things they say, even though they're completely wrong, they also can come across as having total conviction. So it's important to remember that while conviction can be an indicator that the speaker does not feel emotionally conflicted, it does not mean that what they believe is actually true. They might be flat out wrong and blind to the fact. And yes, I did just add ridiculous overemphasis on some of those words to make the point. It is possible for people to convey strong conviction even when they know that they are lying. But from what I've seen, that appearance is superficial. It falls apart under close scrutiny and especially under cross-examination. And so, as with many cult leaders and ideologically driven tyrants, if the brainwasher personally strongly believes in their own lies, then they are more likely to convey persuasive conviction. Hitler's famous speeches are an example. He conveyed total belief. And actually his screaming and shouting are similar to that of a drill sergeant.
Und wollen diese 4 Jahre nützen. Und ehe 6 Jahre vergangen, soll ein Riesenwerk zeigen. Deutsche Arbeiter an das Werk!
Of course, I'm not saying that drill sergeants are mini Hitlers. I mean, there were drill sergeants who trained people to fight the Nazis. No, I'm talking about the generalized patterns of persuasive conviction that are familiar to many contexts. To this effect, the leaders and high-level members of brainwashing institutions are usually brainwashed themselves. They believe their own garbage. And so, in the boot camp scenario of Full Metal Jacket, the most brainwashed character is Sergeant Hartman himself. He's like a robot. He lives and breathes the lies that he speaks. If we could hear his internal dialogue, the things he says to himself, would we find his internal voice to be calm and rational, or would we find that he constantly shouts at himself too? I think it would be the latter. At least the recruits have an end date for their training, and if they make it, they have an end date for their tour of duty, and then they can get back to civilian life and do whatever they want, if they can manage to unbrainwash themselves. But Hartman seems to be brainwashed for life. Don't forget, there was once a time when he too was a maggot recruit being screamed at by another drill sergeant who he may have consciously forgotten about by this point in his life. Drill sergeants get trained too. They don't make all this stuff up, they get conditioned, and they end up shouting endless slogans, most of which they probably didn't even think up themselves. Okay, so that's a wrap. I've no doubt that some of this stuff you already knew, but I hope you picked up some extra insights here, and at least some considerations that you can go away and think about in terms of what kinds of brainwashing you've experienced, witnessed, or even subjected others to. You've been listening to Rob Ager of CollativeLearning.com. Stay free. Just an end of video reminder here, folks. Please make sure to save the link to this video so that you can check in the coming days and weeks whether the video has been shadow banned again. If it has, then you can take screenshots of those searches and send them to me via my other social media, which are linked in the video description. And don't forget to share the video with others who'd like to understand this very important subject. Later folks, bye bye.